Google has now fired 50 employees it said were involved in protests.
Bro, 50? Oh, my God.
Company offices over a cloud computing deal with Israel. Joining us right now on that and the FTC's new ban on non-compete clauses. Alex Heath, he's the deputy editor for The Verge and author of the Command Line newsletter. Also, Joanne Littman is here this morning at the table, lecturer at Yale University and a CNBC contributor. Good morning to both of you. Alex, I think you've woken up super early because I think you're on the West Coast this morning. So let's just talk Google. And I'm curious what you make of what's happened there, but also what you make of happening in terms of the culture in the Valley.
By the way, Google did not fire these people for protesting. Google fired these people for not doing their job. That's why they got fired. It's not that they, they attended a protest on their own time and then they got fired for it. No. Disrupting everybody else. Exactly. Yeah.
Open campus university model, say what you want, what you will, to what looks like a bigger clampdown.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just hit it on the head. I think Google personifies this culture shift that's happening across tech and really across corporate America, but especially in tech. With Google in particular, you've got a company where senior executives were on stage almost in tears in 2016 after Trump got elected, talking about that and the implications of that. And fast forward to this last week, you've got Sundar Pichai sending an email to all employees saying, hey, we don't want politics in the workplace.
The reason why that shift happened is because the public perception changed. That's the big reason. So people had a much more negative view of Trump and people were much more left-wing. And I think that especially in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a pretty large resurgence of conservative values. Like, am I crazy? And I'm talking about in America. Like, somewhere else, I can't really say. But in America, I think there's been a tremendous resurgence of American values. And in the process of that, I think that a lot of people who are the left-wing, like more liberal people, are learning a very harsh lesson that these people in 2016, they didn't care about you. And now they don't care about you either. But the only real reason they're doing it is so they can avoid alienating more customers, or they can avoid not having to, for example, like the contract that Google has with Israel. I think this is like $1 billion or a multi-billion-dollar contract. Why would Google want to blow up $1 billion contract just because of the conscience of a few employees? Just get rid of the employees, problem solved. So why would they do that? The truth is that these companies never cared about these social issues. They don't care who wins or if Israel wipes out all of the Palestinians or if Palestine wipes out all of the Israelis, Google doesn't care. Because Google will sell their services to whoever is on top of the rubble. That's it. And that's the same fact with any other value that they pretend to have.
And this was right after they'd confirmed that they'd fired 28 employees, which for Google is unique, but also for the tech industry at large. I'm not sure we'd ever seen, especially since I've been covering tech for the last decade or so, an example of that many firings at once.
Here's the thing that I think we're all trying to understand is,
because the reason why is because the protests have never cannibalized the person's work. Like, for example, everybody was protesting about Trump, but they were doing it on their own time, and they weren't protesting Google. They weren't protesting Trump through Google. That's the reason. It's obvious.
When some of this began back in 16 and some of the protests in 18 and even in 20, there was and it felt like the employees were running the place, right? The inmates were running the asylum to some degree. And there was a view, I think, among management that they couldn't clamp down on this, even if they wanted to, because these engineers and their employees were so important, and that if, in fact, they actually did anything about these things, that they would have a bigger problem, that the labor market was so...
Somebody says they were disrupting their own company's operations. Of course, they were fired. It's crazy. Again, it's so funny to me to see the delusion that people had that it was ever anything more than that. What happened with Netflix and Chappelle was the closest thing that we had prior to this. Well, it was also Spotify and Joe Rogan. Like, Joe Rogan has platformed Alex Jones multiple times. Alex Jones has literally been convicted. He lost a court case against like basically inciting like a riot or like, you know, putting people's lives at risks who were victims of having a school shooting happen to their kids and having their kids killed. So Joe Rogan platformed that guy and Spotify stood behind him. You know why? Because Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast in the world. And Spotify never cared about those kids, and they don't care about you either. All they do is care about money. Same with Netflix. Netflix cared a lot about values and then making sure that they had the right message going on and all of that. But the moment that Dave Chappelle wants to have a special on Netflix, well, then suddenly now we're talking about freedom of speech. Because all of these things are just simply tools to convince stupid people into thinking that the corporations really care about them. But they don't.
Tight that these people would race off to other jobs. What is
exactly
the sort of
right.
calculus today versus the calculus then?
I mean, I think you've seen a lot of power shift from the rank and file back to the company. And what was unusual about this protest is that it was a sit-in protest. So there were people physically impeding others and standing in the offices of the CEO of Google Cloud, for example. That is really taking things to a new level. Google is no stranger to protests, but I think they saw this as an opportunity to really put a flag down and say, look, we're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. Okay, and then they ended up...
Well, they can't. Like, imagine if they did. Then the next day, nobody would be working. Google had to shut these people down. Because if you don't assert dominance, then people are just going to do whatever they want.
Firing an additional 20.
So, Joanne, are you then of the view that this was just so egregious, but it's not really a cultural shift? Meaning the protests of old, which might not have actually happened literally in the physical office of the CEO of a division, those protests will be okay tomorrow, but these protests won't? Or you think this is a new paradigm?
I do think it's a new paradigm. We are seeing a cultural shift. I think about, it just so happened coincidentally.
You're seeing a money shift. The culture is irrelevant. It's a money shift. If Palestine was, the one paying Google billions of dollars, Google would be completely fine with people protesting Israel. Absolutely.
2018, there was a huge walkout. It was about workplace culture. It was about sexual harassment. It was November 2018. I happened to be at the Googleplex, Google headquarters, to give a talk that day. So I was in the midst of this. And
there's another component to this that I think should be added in, is that in 2018, tech was still a rapidly growing industry. And even in COVID, it was still a rapidly growing industry. So because of that, if they fired people then, it would be harder for them to get more people because there were more people, more jobs that were needed than people. Now, these tech companies are cutting people constantly. They're getting rid of people all the time. So each individual employee is worth less because now, like if you get rid of them, there's way more people to replace them. So you don't really have to care about somebody's politics or somebody's problems anymore because the supply is too high. And so why would you give a shit? If this person's causing problems, just throw them away and get a new one. But that was harder to do back then. 2018 wasn't that far ago? Well, I'm just looking at the charts.
Was supported by the company. It was huge, but it was peaceful, and it almost felt like a party, right? And you have this environment versus where you are today. And I think there's a couple of major differences that have happened. One is employers have been trying to pull back ever since, the pandemic, where employees all got the power. They're trying to pull some of that back. But there are a couple of real differences, and the hugest one, I think, is that in those 2018, 2016, you had employees who were together, who were pushing together, unified against management for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Today, you have employee against employee.
It's much more splintered.
Much more splintered, and also
it's easier to, it's easier to get rid of them. True.
You have employees who are saying, I'm feeling unsafe. And you're in an environment with Hamas and Israel, where you've got an increase in anti-Semitic incidents and anti-Muslim incidents. So it's a different environment. And the one other thing I just want to point out.
I appreciate her saying that there's an increase in incidents on both sides, because I think that's true. I think that it must really suck for, I feel like it was really kind of fucked up that, like, right now we're talking about, like, how many Jewish people are, like, victims of anti-Semitic attacks, whenever we just got done having that happen to Asians because of COVID, and Arabs had to deal with probably the better part of 10 years, maybe even more of 10 years than whenever they lived here, of negative feedback and people being shitty to them, because a lot of them aren't even Islamic. They're not Muslims. Like, they just live here. There's a reason why they're here and not there in a lot of cases. But they're getting shit on as if they're somehow responsible for September 11th. This happened for years. But now this is a problem. I'm glad that at least she's saying that.
Is even in the last 5 years, the dialogue, the cultural national dialogue has gotten way coarser, from everything from politics to Congress to public life to people like Elon Musk, who are now out there, who are sort of, ginning up sort of a really kind of vitriolic dialogue.
Alex, I want to talk about this.
I think everybody's ginning up a vitriolic dialogue. I don't think it's fair to categorize Elon Musk that way, but, that's fine.
FTC decision and how it's going to change things. California, by the way, has always been a state, or at least more recently has been a state, where these non-competes are not always enforceable. Is this going to change the dynamic there? Or are we just talking about a different kind of worker? $150,000 seems to be the threshold for preventing non-competes in the future, but you do have to have some kind of policy-oriented role that could be potentially a little fuzzy and fungible.
Andrew, I haven't really seen a ton of high-profile examples of tech companies enforcing these non-competes. You've seen Amazon do it selectively. There was an example.
To be fair, the reason why they don't enforce the non-competes is the fear of the enforcement of the non-competes. Like, I think this is kind of a bad argument, because a lot of people clearly don't want to actively break the contract that they signed. They don't want to take that risk. Who wants to take that risk against Google or Amazon?
With, I believe, an executive who went to Google Cloud in the last few years, where they tried to enforce a non-compete because he was coming from Seattle. But yeah, you're right. California hasn't had this. The California tech industry is the best tech industry and one of the best industries in the world. I haven't met anyone who likes a non-compete who isn't the one who's enforced it. So I think this is generally good. There's been a kind of chilling effect generally. But as it relates specifically to tech, I haven't seen a ton of examples of this actually being forced. I think it's more that kind of unspoken chilling effect.
Somebody in chat says, even me, fresh out of college, got stuck dealing with an NDA, or sorry, not NDA, non-compete with a $30K job. A $30,000 a year job with a non-compete clause. That's crazy. Wow.
We only got 20 seconds. A good thing or a bad thing long-term for labor?
Oh, very much a good thing.
And if you were a CEO, you go to court over this or no?
I think they will go to court over this. I don't know that they'll win. I think the question is, does the FTC actually have the mandate? Do they have the power to put this into place? And I don't, we'll see how it plays out.
I think they do, and I hope they do. That's my perspective.
Google is now.
I do think so, and I think what's going to keep happening is that these companies are going to be becoming more, like politically ambiguous, especially as kind of I think that, like, culturally there's been like more of a shift towards conservatism, and I think that's what's going to happen, is that these companies again don't really care about any of these values. I'll link you guys the video, and I don't think they really care about any of these values at all. They never did. They only pretended to care to get people's money. And so now whenever the values are no longer being reflected in their customer population, now they just pretend like they never had them. It's the same reason about how there would be companies that would, back in the day, it was family values. Now it's diversity and inclusion. Guess what, guys? They're just doing it for more money. They don't care either way.